You should all observe me closely. I will bend forward and peer between my knees at the plaza, and absolutely nothing will occur." Before anyone could intervene, Adebayo bent forward and separated his feet. Slowly, defiantly, he gazed downward, and something caused him to become rigid with terror. Long ago, in the town of Akora, a peaceful community situated among thick woodlands and winding streams, existence was uncomplicated, yet brimming with enigmas. The wise ones, honored for their knowledge, frequently cautioned the townspeople about numerous matters, but one prohibition surpassed all others: never bend forward and peer between your knees in the plaza. That solitary instruction had been transmitted across generations, embedded in the consciousness of every infant born in Akora. None ever challenged it, none except Adebayo. Adebayo was the sole offspring of Ekene and Amara, a married pair who had endured 7 agonizing years beneath the burden of childlessness. Prior to his arrival, they had weathered 8 devastating losses, 8 pregnancies that ended in sorrow, leaving them desperate and shattered. When Adebayo was at last brought into the world, the town rejoiced as though the divine powers had bestowed a sacred gift upon Akora. Percussion instruments resonated throughout the darkness, spirits flowed abundantly. The elders proclaimed that fortune had smiled upon the household. Due to this wonder, Ekene and Amara indulged their son beyond reason. They feared even speaking sternly to him, worried the divine forces might reclaim him. But affection, when clouded by dread, can transform into something perilous. As time progressed, Adebayo matured into a conceited and haughty young man. He dismissed everyone's counsel. He ridiculed the wise ones, scoffed at traditions, and derided those who attempted to guide him. The townspeople murmured privately, declaring he was troubled, that an offspring born following such anguish should be raised with prudence, not excessive leniency. Yet his parents merely smiled, insisting he is merely young, with maturity he will transform. One twilight, beneath the dense canopy of the Iroko tree at the settlement's boundary, Adebayo gathered with his companions, discussing and celebrating. As the dusk breeze stirred the foliage, the young men commenced their customary conversation about supernatural beings, prohibitions, and the peculiar regulations the elders imposed. Someone raised the plaza regulation, and the gathering grew hushed. Chima, the eldest among them, murmured, "My father claimed that if you ever bend forward and gaze between your knees in the plaza, you will witness what mortals should never perceive." Another youth shuddered, contributing, "They claim individuals who attempted it were never unchanged afterward." Adebayo reclined, smirking. He kicked a pebble and declared, "Is that sufficient to frighten you all? An absurd regulation about gazing between your knees?" The others regarded him with astonishment. Chima scowled. "Adebayo, the elders state it's dangerous with purpose. Why would you even consider attempting it?" But Adebayo merely chuckled, the sound harsh and contemptuous. "The elders simply desire to control us. They manufacture fear to ensure obedience. Tomorrow I shall visit the plaza and demonstrate that this alleged curse is merely superstition." His companions shifted uncomfortably, trading concerned expressions. Obina, the youngest, voiced his concern with a quavering tone. "Don't attempt it, Adebayo. What if something terrible transpires?" Adebayo's grin broadened. "Something terrible? What could conceivably happen? You all may attend and observe. I will bend forward and gaze, and nothing will transpire. I won't perceive any phantom or entity. You will see how ridiculous this entire matter is." The next afternoon, Akora Plaza bustled with vitality as usual, overflowing with colors, voices, and the aroma of grilled corn, cured fish, and fresh fermented drink. Women beckoned to patrons carrying containers of produce atop their heads. Men negotiated over tubers and livestock. Children raced surefoot among the vendors, their joy resounding between the timber tables. The sun blazed brightly overhead, projecting amber light across the red soil, while the wind transported the fragrance of earth and seasoning. Into this vibrant disorder, Adebayo strolled toward the plaza's center. His companions followed hesitantly, anxious yet unable to turn back. "Are you certain about this?" Chima murmured, surveying the area as if anticipating the gods themselves to be observing. Too late for retreat now, Adebayo replied with a smirk. He navigated through the labyrinth of vendors until he reached the precise center of the plaza, the ancient clearing where elders formerly assembled for councils and offerings. "This is the location," Adebayo announced, stopping. His voice projected across the plaza's commotion. Several women turned to observe him with curiosity. "Now, observe me and understand." His companions shifted uneasily, their hearts racing. Before anyone could prevent him, Adebayo positioned his bare feet securely on the dusty terrain. He separated his legs and gradually, arrogantly, bent forward. The conversation surrounding them started to diminish. The wind seemed to quiet. Even the distant sound of mortars crushing grain grew faint. Adebayo's companions stood petrified, their eyes enlarged as they watched him lower his head and examine the space between his knees. At first he laughed. "There, you see, nothing." But his words caught in his windpipe. His laughter ceased abruptly, his expression contorted into bewilderment, then terror. Because through his own legs, the plaza was no longer the thriving, sunlit place it had been moments earlier. The vendors were there, but the colors had vanished, replaced by a dull, uneasy gray. The women who were trading produce were present, but everything was obscured. Adebayo blinked, assuming it was an illusion, but no. The longer he stared, the more distorted everything became. The ground beneath him wavered, and the air turned frigid. A repulsive, moist odor filled his nostrils, the stench of decay and something primordial. Then he heard a voice. It was his companions calling, "Adebayo, rise, don't do this." He could hardly see them. Adebayo gasped and staggered backward, losing his balance. His companions cried out, rushing to his position. "Adebayo, what happened? What did you see?" Chima shouted, grasping his arm. But Adebayo didn't respond. His eyes were wide, his body quavering. He surveyed the plaza. Everything had returned to normalcy. The colors, the voices, the laughter, everything seemed ordinary once more. Except for one detail. As he looked around, the people nearest him had stopped moving. The woman trading peppers stared at him, not with curiosity, but with eyes as pale as cinders. Her mouth moved slowly, forming words he couldn't perceive. Then, one by one, the other plaza vendors turned as well, their faces expressionless, their eyes lightly luminous. "Adebayo," Chima whispered, his voice trembling. But Adebayo couldn't move. His legs felt weighted, as if anchored in the earth. Gradually, he began to turn his head. Initially, nothing seemed unusual. The plaza appeared identical. The people continued their trade. The aroma of roasted groundnuts and dried fish still lingered in the atmosphere. Adebayo grinned, ready to ridicule his trembling companions. "See, nothing happened," he said, his voice saturated with pride. But then it began. The world around him began to distort. The colors of the plaza merged together like pigment dissolving in rain precipitation. The cheerful sounds of merchants bargaining faded into a low, muffled drone. The air thickened, heavy and cold, and everything around him began to move like shadows imprisoned inside a vision. Fear crept into Adebayo's heart. His smile faded. He blinked frantically, trying to dispel the strange fog. And then he saw them. Shadowy figures moving upside down. Their heads hung toward the ground, while their legs floated in the atmosphere above them. Their skin glimmered like liquid darkness, and from their hollow faces burned eyes so brilliant, so piercing, they seemed to pierce through the veil of the ordinary realm. They drifted silently through the plaza, invisible to everyone else. Their bodies whispered against the air as they glided past containers of tubers and peppers. They were not human. They were something else entirely. Entities from a dimension Adebayo had no right entering. One of the entities turned its head toward Adebayo, its glowing eyes locking onto his. And in that instant, Adebayo's heart stopped. The entity spoke in a voice colder than midnight. "Now you see us, Adebayo. Now you belong to us." A sharp chill sliced through his body. He gasped and attempted to stand, but his legs refused to move. Regardless of how intensely he tried, he couldn't rise. His spine stiffened painfully, as if invisible hands held him in position. He attempted to scream, but his voice was trapped in his throat. He was frozen, bent forward, his eyes locked between his legs, caught in a position no human body should maintain. The entities circled him, their whispers crawled around his ears like cold wind. His eyes bulged with terror as his limbs began to tremble violently. Perspiration streamed down his face, mixing with the plaza's dust. To everyone else, it appeared as though Adebayo had suddenly lost his mind. His companions stared in confusion. At first, they thought he was pretending, trying to frighten them. But when his body twisted unnaturally and his mouth opened in a silent scream, fear washed over them. "Adebayo!" Chima shouted, his voice breaking. No response. "Stop it! Please, stop!" cried Ubina. But Adebayo couldn't stop. He couldn't even move. And then came the look, his eyes wide, staring at something far beyond them, as if he was witnessing two realms simultaneously. That was when the young men ran. They ran faster than they ever had in their lives, through the crowd, through the crimson dust, their hearts pounding like war drums. They didn't stop until they reached Adebayo's residence, bursting in, breathless and shaking. "Ekene! Amara!" they screamed. "Adebayo is still in the plaza. Something is wrong. Something's holding him." The parents froze, eyes wide in panic. Ekene didn't wait for explanation. He grabbed his walking stick and ran, Amara following close behind, tears already streaming down her face. Word spread quickly through Akora. By the time they reached the plaza, a large crowd had gathered, murmuring in fear and confusion. And there, in the very center of the plaza, stood Adebayo, still bent forward, still frozen, his body twisted into a painful arc, his eyes wide open in horror. Perspiration glistened on his trembling skin, yet he made no sound. The townspeople gasped, making the sign of protection over their chests. The chief spiritualist arrived moments later, his white chalk markings glowing faintly under the sun. He stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Adebayo's head. He looked at everyone with fear in his eyes. When he stopped, he shook his head gravely. "He has witnessed what no mortal should witness," the spiritualist said. "The entities of the plaza, the guardians of our dimension, they exist between our realm and theirs, maintaining equilibrium. Once you perceive them and they perceive you, they mark you." Amara fell to her knees, crying, "What can we do, spiritualist? Please rescue my son." The old man sighed deeply. "I will appeal to them. I will request mercy, but whether they will release him, that is not for man to determine." Night fell over Akora like a dark shroud. The once lively town was silent. Even the crickets dared not sing. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the trees filled the air, a haunting melody that carried fear to every doorstep. In the center of the plaza, Adebayo still stood, or rather hung in that awful bent position. His parents had placed oil lamps around him, but the flickering light only made him look more terrifying. His eyes were open, unblinking, staring into something no one else could see. The chief spiritualist, wrapped in a crimson cloth embroidered with cowrie shells, arrived again, carrying a gourd and a staff decorated with feathers and bones. Behind him trailed Ekene and Amara, their faces soaked in tears. "Stay back," the spiritualist commanded. His voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "The boundary between the realms is thin tonight. Only the entities can decide his fate." He drew a wide circle around Adebayo with white chalk and poured fermented drink upon the ground. Then he began to chant, low and deep, a language older than the town itself. The people watched as the flames of the lamps danced violently, flickering in the windless air. Soon the air grew heavy and cold. The smell of decay filled the plaza. The shadows on the ground began to move, slowly at first, then swirling like smoke around Adebayo's body. Amara screamed. Ekene fell to his knees, clutching the soil in despair. But the spiritualist did not stop. His chants grew louder, echoing through the night like thunder rolling from the mountains.
Entities of the plaza, guardians of the passage between realms, hear me. This young man is foolish. His arrogance blinded him. Spare his soul, for the sins of ignorance are not the same as the sins of defiance. Suddenly, the wind howled, the lamps flickered out one by one. Then, out of the shadows they came. The inverted entities appeared once more, tall, dark figures with eyes like burning coals. They glided silently into the circle, surrounding Adebayo. Everyone fell to the ground, too terrified to look. One of them, the tallest, stepped forward. His voice cut through the air like ice breaking on stone. He looked into what must never be seen. He witnessed the truth that binds existence and death. The plaza is not only for the living. The spiritualist bowed deeply. Then let his foolishness be a lesson to others. Let him leave, if only to remind the living of your law. For a long moment there was silence. Only the crackle of unseen fire echoed in the darkness. Then, one by one, the entities vanished, melting back into the air as if they had never been there. Adebayo gasped, his body jerked violently. Then, with a final tremor, he fell to the ground, motionless. His mother ran to him, wailing. Ekene lifted his son's head onto his lap. Adebayo, my son, speak to us. At first there was nothing. Then Adebayo's eyes fluttered open, but they were different, dark, empty, as if a part of him was still staring into that other realm. He looked around slowly, confusion clouding his gaze. Father, he whispered weakly, why is everything so quiet? The chief spiritualist sighed deeply. He lives, he said softly, but he will never be the same. The entities have taken what they desired. Days turned into weeks. Adebayo recovered, or at least his body did. He could walk, eat, and speak, but he never laughed again. He spoke little, spent his days sitting under the iroko tree, staring blankly at the plaza. And sometimes, when the sun was low and the shadows grew long, townspeople would find him talking to someone unseen. They said he could still see them, the entities of the plaza, that once you gazed between your knees in that sacred place, your eyes could never unsee what was hidden from mortals. Years later, the elders would tell the tale of Adebayo of Akora, the young man who defied the gods, and every child who heard it would shiver when their fathers warned them, never bend forward and gaze between your knees in the plaza, because no one truly knew what realm waited on the other side of that forbidden gaze. But Adebayo knew, and though he lived, his soul remained trapped, half in the realm of the living, half among the guardians of the plaza who watched from the unseen dimension.